All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today, I'm going to walk through a quick little bit on editing your photos in Lightroom. Basic stuff. There's more that you can get involved in, but today we're just going to keep it kind of simple and start off. So, when you open Lightroom, this is what you see. You have your library of photos sort of arranged all collectively here. On the left-hand side over here we have all our different folders from all the different dates. This is how I organize. I organize my photo by date. First by year, then by month, then by date. Helps me kind of keep organized by individual photo shoots. Now today I've selected a shoot that I did back in January, on January 5th. I went up to Lansing. I went up to the Broad Art Museum and shot the museum. You know, the museum itself is a piece of art. So I've been curious to get in there and photograph it for a little bit of time here. So anyway, I've gone through these. I've assigned every photo a rating. It kind of gives me a quick way to measure whether or not I like a photo enough to work on it enough. I use a kind of a 3-star system. 1 star is garbage. Not going to use it ever. Eventually I delete those photos. 2 stars might be useful. It might be useful for HDR purposes in a series of brackets. It might be useful to help tell a larger story, provide a little extra context. It might be like environmental type shots, that sort of thing. 3 stars are the ones that I really enjoy. I'm keen on getting into the details and spending some time on those. If I have a shot that's almost perfect coming out of the camera, I eventually give that a 4 star. But usually it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which is a pretty quick process. We can talk about that in a different lecture. But today, I've already gone through and rated all my photos here, and you can see I have a whole bunch of different sequences. I'm pretty excited about the exterior of the building. The interior was all right. I felt a little rushed that day, but I got some decent shots, things that I'm excited about as the afternoon sun was setting. On the outside. Now, the exterior of the building is like this stainless steel, very highly geometric structure. Zaha Hadid, the world-famous architect, was the designer of the building, and she did a nice job on the outside. There are certain angles where it looks really dramatic, and there's other angles where it looks more like a tank. There's too much metal covering up the windows and that sort of thing. But overall, I think it's a wonderful addition to the University of or Michigan State's campus. So I've already sorted through these. I can filter and just show you the 3-star photos, and basically bring up the filter dialog down here. I can say everything bigger than 2 stars, everything greater than 3 stars, or 4 stars, whatever the case may be. In this case, let's limit it to 3 stars. And from here, I can zoom in on these pictures. This is a HDR that I'd already put together, but you see, I bracketed almost everything that day. The light was changing pretty quickly. I wasn't sure how dramatic I wanted to go. The reflective nature of the building itself made things a little tricky. I didn't want to blow out any details. I played around with it. I got very close to the building, which really kind of exaggerated some of these angles. You can see here I was almost underneath this kind of trapezoidal structure. So let's look through here and find something. Now, I like that. I like that a lot. There's nothing interfering here. Nothing getting in our way. This might be the one that we go after. You can see I've already done some edits on it. A little heavier handed than I normally do, but the sunset, I was feeling it. I tried to get the name of the museum in the picture here, but it just seems to stretch it out. I don't like all this. I don't like all these trees over here. Just couldn't quite get it balanced out the way I wanted to. And the amount of time I had is, I should mention, it was about 5 degrees outside when I was shooting this. Here we go. Let's work on this one right here. All right, I like this. Nicely balanced between the different sides. All right, right now I'm gonna create a virtual copy because I don't want to mess with what I've already done. And in the way Lightroom works is you have these different modules. You have a library module, which is your organizational tools. You have your develop module, which is where you do your editing. you have a map, you know, so I can place it on a map. Yeah, let's turn that off. Right here, I can search here for a road. Let's just go East Lansing. East Lansing, Michigan. There we go. Look at that. East Lansing right there. And the Broad Museum, if I recall, is right over here. Right there. So what I can do is I can select all these pictures. And I can just drag them up here and put them right. Come on, Lightroom. I can just drag them up and put them right on there. And you can see what happens over here on the right-hand side. In a second, we'll enable the address lookup. And so it fills in the GPS location here. You can see it's looking up these different locations over here automatically. And what it does is it fills in the information. It tells each file that it's in East Lansing in Michigan, the United States, US. I can then go back later on when looking through 100,000 photos and say, show me the pictures of East Lansing. And it'll pull everything up. It's really kind of handy that way. You have the ability to put your images into a book or a slideshow or print them out. The last 4 modules here are all really about publishing one way or another. So today we're going to edit. So we go over here to the develop module, and we don't want that picture there. We wanted this one right here. All right, and we are going to reset this photo to the way it was before I did any changes to it. This is my base exposure. As I look at it, I start to notice a few things right off the bat that I want to change. One thing is, you know, it's an architectural photo, so you want kind of straight lines to be straight. Kind of crazy to say on a building like this where there are no real true vertical lines or real horizontal lines, but there are some other indicators around the image. We have light poles over here, and here we have the buildings in the background, and those kind of visual clues, you know, they still provide information to the viewer. We want to be careful in how we handle that. So eventually we'll straighten those out. I want to add a little bit of drama in the middle here. You know, I want to avoid an HDR type of situation where I'm blending 2 different pictures today. I'd love to shoot this at night because this is a big window, big open gallery, and I bet it would look really cool with the orange light kind of streaming out of it. But today we just want to add a little bit of contrast in there, bring out some detail in the shadows, maybe punch up the contrast in these areas here. And I really want to capture this sunlight that's gleaming off of this one sort of facet here. You can see that I probably took this shot maybe a minute too late. There's a bit of a shadow creeping around the corners here, but you know, for our purposes today, this is still going to work. We have some orangish hues in the light here. We have the blue sky, of course, bluish tones on the other half here. So we have some nice contrast, not only between dark and light, but between different colors. So we have a complementary color set of blue versus orange, which provides a bit of tension going on there too. So let's get to it. First thing I normally do is crop. You know, what's nice in Lightroom is that once I crop, I can crop anything any way I want and say, oh boy, that's a terrible mistake, and we can just go back and fix that. That's the beauty of the non-destructive editing in Lightroom. But I'm looking around the edges here, and I see like this red sign here. I like the trees. Kind of got this organic thing going on against this very inorganic structure. So I don't like the red kind of peeking around the corners. So I'll just tighten that up a little bit there. I see this little bench sticking up there. I might consider tweaking that a little bit, although then we run into the bottom of that light pole there. Let's see here. Maybe we just bring this in pretty tight here. One other nice thing that Lightroom offers is this concept of these overlays. You can see the grid pattern going on here. I like using the diagonals a lot in my photos, and I like this overlay here. I'm not beholden to it by any means, but I do like it when people use the diagonal. Just looks good because it helps emphasize length in photos. I like to tell people it's the longest part of the image. So I mean, you could you could go kind of extreme on this and really line it up. Oh, let's play with it. Why not? We can always tweak it after the fact. But you can really go, and this is the longest part of the image from corner to corner. And so by utilizing the diagonal, you can really fill up the space of your image with your subject. So let's go like that. It feels a little, heavy to me on the one side. So I'm just going to tweak that again. Maybe back off just a little bit. Something along those lines there. And I'm watching my corners. You know, I don't like that tree getting cut off right there. If this really bothers me in the end, I can fix that later too. So we'll start with that. The first thing I always do is I go down here to camera calibration. I have calibrated my camera. I'm shooting with a Canon 6D. I've calibrated it, so I always change that a little bit. You can see just a little bit of difference in some of the tones. It's not a major shift on this image, but I like to do it. It makes my colors true. Gives me a good starting point. Now moving on here, the first choice we have is, do we want a black and white image? This is the kind of shot that could work really well in black and white, or do we want a color image? You know, I like the colors. I said that before. I like the blues and the oranges. So we're gonna leave it in color here. Now you have the option for white balance. You have sort of three different options. You can do as shot, which is straight what you shot with in your camera. And I do shoot raw files. That's what the CR2 up here means. If you shoot JPEG, it's going to be a little bit different, but you have fewer options basically. But you can do auto white balance, where it tries to make everything average out to be gray, and you see here that it's added a bunch of orange because it sees a lot of blue in the clouds and in the side of the building. I don't really like that. You can also pick any one of these presets here. You pick daylight, which is probably the most neutral white balance you can use. If you want to capture colors and stuff, that's a good one to pick. Now you can notice I shot this in daylight. My camera says it's 5150 Kelvin, and Adobe thinks it's 5500 Kelvin. You know, go with whatever looks best. You know, it's not like Canon is superior to Adobe in this regard, or vice versa. The other way you can neutralize colors, use this eye picker tool. You select that, and you come over here, and you just pick on anything you want to be gray. Ideally, it would be gray, but if I pick on this metal panel over here, you know, it makes that gray and pushes everything to the blue side. You can see the color temperature changes right here to 4800. I don't really like that so much, and we actually have a preview panel on the left-hand side here. So as I move over the image a little bit, it gives me some indication of what it's going to look like. I can pick on top of this orange and really push it into the blues. But again, I'm not so excited about doing that. You know, the third option is you can just eyeball it, make it up as you go. And I think for this image, I'm going to try that. I'm going to just warm that up a little bit there. Let's see. And another tip is, I want this side to be orange. I want this side to be blue, and this is kind of a subtler blue. So I can go down to saturation right away. I can just crank up the saturation, and then go back to the white balance and sort of tweak it. You can see now everything's orange. If I go all the way down here, then everything's blue, right? We want to find a happy medium. So something like that, I think, might end up looking pretty dramatic. And we could tweak the tint, add a little magenta to it too. I think that looks pretty cool. It's an interesting direction. Like I said, we can always go back. So I zero out the saturation at this point. Now, it's still looking pretty flat. No big deal. Let's get to the real editing here. Now, some people hit auto, and yeah, see, it brought out the detail in there too, but it still looks flat. So I like to do this part myself. The exposure, and I just go down the line. Sometimes I jump around, but I generally go down the line. The exposure, you can add exposure, you can subtract exposure. You know, in this case, I want the building to be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go right about there for now. Contrast, I tend to back off on the contrast at this point because I like to control the contrast a little bit more in here. And what I'm watching is this area right in here. I really like the subtle gradations in there. So I can, if I add a lot of contrast, which is making the darks darker and it pushes the bright areas brighter, it starts to get a little harsh there. And obviously this is extreme, so you can see, and I can take the contrast way down. You can see the histogram gets smushed together in the middle a little bit. I try to be a little gentle on this, but I usually back this off just a little bit right there. And look at the overall scene. It's starting to look all right. Then I just come down here. I will start with the whites and the blacks. I like to set my white point and my black point. I don't want to blow out any white areas in this picture. You could make an argument that these would be specular highlights along this shiny metal, but I don't want to go that direction on this image. So what I can do is I can hold down the Alt button and drag this white slider, and you can see what's turning white first are these clouds. They're the brightest part of the scene. So you can see how they blow out there as I drag the white slider over. So I'm going to back off till they're just, I'm going to, in this case, it's pretty good. I'm going to leave it at 0. And the same thing on the blacks. If I drag it way down, you can start seeing all these areas that go to pure black. Now, I said before, I want to bring out some detail in here if we can. So I don't want that to go to pure black. I don't want to kill that. So we're going to bring that back. You can see there's just a few pixels left that are pure black. And so we end up with a +7 there or something like that. Now from here, I go by eye on the highlights and shadows. There might be certain cases where I know something is supposed to look a certain way or something like that. But in this case, I'm not really that concerned with it. So I can bring the highlights down here. You can see I'm bringing more detail back into the sky. And it's a pretty aggressive -100 there, but I think it works. And the shadows, I still want a little more detail in the shadows, so you can see what's happening here. We're adding a lot of luminosity in the shadows, which brings us some more of that detail that I'm talking about. It's starting to look a little bit better. Still looks a little flat for my liking, so I'm going to revisit the contrast here and just punch that up a little bit. But it's looking pretty good. Moving on down here to presence, which is a strange term that Adobe has coined, we have clarity. What clarity does is adds contrast to edges, basically, anywhere that they may be found. It's sort of like sharpening, except on a wider brush stroke. Let's see, I can add a lot of clarity. I can subtract a lot of clarity and makes it all smoothed out. I don't go too crazy on the clarity. I've run into problems when I've gotten super aggressive with it, but I'll add a little bit here. You can see the difference up in this area. See how that changes as I slide that up. I'm gonna leave it around +10. Then we can start getting into our color settings, vibrance and saturation. Vibrance basically adjusts the saturation in low saturation areas. It protects the already high saturated zones, so you don't really blow out the colors. If I adjust the saturation, if I go up to 100, you can see like these colors get really aggressive pretty quickly. We don't want that. If I go on vibrance, well, it's adjusting the blues a bit more. It sort of protects skin tones. It was originally designed as a portrait tool. So again, you can just eyeball it. I try not to go overboard with it because it can sort of break your colors apart a little bit. You get weird artifacts, posterization, that sort of thing. But I want to emphasize this color difference up in here. So I might add a little bit there. I just go back and forth until I find a value that I like. So like, it's probably as aggressive as I've been in a while. So there we are. We've added a bit of vibrance and a bit of saturation in there. And we can go back up to the color balance here and change that if we want. 4619, as you can see, maybe right about there. Just tweak that a little bit. I just add a little bit more warmth to this side of the building. All right, so it's coming along. The tone curve is next. This is a really, really powerful tool. We can adjust luminosity using this RGB channel. We can adjust individual color channels to give our images a certain look and tone. We can emulate different films with it. I usually stay with the luminosity, but there's two ways to operate this. the concepts are the same. Along the bottom axis, you have your input luminance. All right, guys, I have to hold up here. We are editing a photo of the Broad Art Museum up in East Lansing, Michigan. Zaha Hadid structure, very dramatic postmodern take on an art museum, if you will. We are back in the develop module here. You can see that. Over on the left-hand side here, we have a preview screen. We have presets if you're interested in presets. And our history. I usually collapse all this stuff down. I don't really use any of that stuff, especially in my kind of first edits. Over on the right-hand side, we have our control panels. We have our histogram at the top with our warning indicators. Right now, we're looking good. We're not blowing anything out. We're not blocking off any shadows. It all looks good. We have some local editing tools up here. We've already made our basic adjustments. You can see we've added a little contrast and exposure. We've crushed the highlights down a little bit and kind of open up the shadows a little bit to bring out some more of that detail in here. Mostly these kind of ribs that you see here, they're actually window mullions. I like the grid effect that they kind of lend to the structure. So we've also bumped up the saturation and vibrance here. We may end up backing that off on that in a little bit here, but for now it gives me a pretty good roadmap of where I want to take this shot. So now we're down in the tone curves. As I started to say before, this is a pretty powerful tool. It allows us to adjust luminosity in very specific ways, much more specifically than these sliders will offer. And the way you use it is, you basically set these anchor points. I'm going to set an anchor point here, and you can see these numbers change. Watch this number right up here. It says 45.5, 34.5. What that's saying is the input is 45.5% luminance. We're going to take that down to 34.5% luminance. So we've made the image darker. And we're not just making that point darker. And you can see as I drag that further down, our shadows are getting really dark here, while the highlight areas are relatively untouched. You can see the before and after. Here's the before, here's the after. So the cloud's not changed so much, but the building itself is. And so we can control specific areas of luminosity. And when we do this, a couple things happen. Not only are we making certain areas brighter and certain areas darker, but we're also adding contrast and taking contrast out of our image. So I'm gonna delete these shots, these anchor points for now. Essentially what happens is when you add a steep line here, this is increasing the contrast up in the clouds, and all of a sudden we can see a lot more detail up there. It affects the saturation a little bit too, so you want to be careful of that. And we, again, using the parametric editing of Lightroom, we can always go back and revisit that. And along this bottom part here, we've made everything on the lower half of the luminance scale black. So you can see our warning indicator now is just all fired up like a bunch of Christmas tree lights. So the question is, what do we want to do? I mean, that's how you do it. You can add anchor points, you can drag them up, and you can drag them down. A couple general strategies. A pretty typical curve might look like an S. I'll show you the extreme version of it. An S like this. And what this does is it makes the highlights a little bit brighter, makes the shadows a little bit darker, and it increases contrast in the midtones, which is usually where the important detail is in most images. And when you increase contrast where there's detail, you're going to reveal more detail. You're going to make it easier to see. So we're increasing detail in the midtones at the expense of detail in the highlights and the shadows. Now, this is, like I said before, an extreme version. Let's back it off a little bit. And so I'm looking at this shot here. We're just going to eyeball it here. I'm going to add an anchor point here. I'm going to bump that up here. I'm looking at this region right here. And as you can see, as I float over this region here, this information panel here shifts and tells me where I am. So like 50s and 60s. And as I go over here, I can say, all right, I want to go down about 60 here. And then I'll bump that up and I'll be more direct. If I want to be even more direct about it, I can use this picker tool. And as I float over here, you can see the little black dot in the tone panel move around. And we can make like surgically precise edits this way. So I'm liking where this is over here. We've made that a little bit brighter. I might go back in here and make this just a tad darker. I don't want it to go to black, but if I make it a tad darker, we've increased the contrast there a little bit more. But again, we've darkened the shadows a little bit. We've bumped up the highlights a little bit. So it's a smooth S-curve. We turn that off, turn it on. You can see the differences there. Now, you may say, oh, okay, we've sort of destroyed some detail up in here. And that is this peak in this histogram that you can see underneath here. So we can always just kind of add another point in there and see where we like it. You know, we can drag that down a little bit, make the sky a little bit darker, but leave the clouds a little bit brighter. So we can add contrast in here without affecting the contrast on the building itself, because they're slightly different brightness values. So again, before and after, I always like to kind of look, and you can see we've opened up the shadows here a little bit. That's okay. They're different colors, so we still have the contrast going on there. And that's looking pretty good, I think. We can always go into the different color channels too, and say, let's say we want the shadows to have a blue tint to them. We can drag up the shadows over here. We've made them blue, but we've made the highlight areas still warm. We can add a curve to it that way. So you can see we can give our photo kind of a radically different look if we want. For now, we're going to keep the colors looking pretty clean. Let me just get that back down to where it's supposed to be. Right there. And you can change the red channel, the green channel, the blue channel, or all three. All right, moving on. We move into the color controls. Hue, saturation, layer, hue, saturation, luminance controls. And you can see we can fine-tune all of our different colors. Reds, orange, yellows, greens, blues, aquas, blue, purples, magentas, whatever the case may be. I usually start with saturation. I will decide to kind of bump up the saturation on some colors and lower it on others. Depends on what the dominant colors are in my scene. In this case, I like the oranges and I like the bluish purples. I might push these purplish magenta tones more towards blue here in a second. But you can see if I drag the sliders, you can see what happens. Like the red tones come out. And you can see, if we zoom in here, colors are not always as continuous as we would like them to be. So you want to be careful. You don't want to push it so hard that things kind of break apart. My general advice is to avoid doing this kind of thing, where you have one color going one direction and the next color is going the opposite direction. I like this curve to generally look like a progression. I don't live by that 100%, but you want to be careful. Now, looking at the reds, I'm not excited about where the reds are in this picture. Orange is going to be a different matter, though. You can see there's a lot of orange. This is one of our dominant colors, and we have a decision of how much we want to pump that up. I'm going to pump it up a little bit. Something like that, maybe. Yellow. I always drag it all the way up and down to see exactly what it's impacting. A lot of times, things that look green, like grass or trees, actually appear in the yellow slider in Lightroom. So in this case, I'm seeing the yellows pop up down here and over here. I don't really want a lot of attention on those trees, so I'm gonna de-emphasize them by dragging that saturation slider down. Just do this for the rest of the colors. Aqua, we might start getting into the sky a little bit, but not so much. All right, blue, we'll get into the sky. You can see if we pump up the blues, we get the sky, we get some of the shadow areas in here. I want to be careful there. So I'm going to adjust the blues up and down so you can see as I change the saturation, we add more color in the sky, get a little more these shadow areas over here. So let's find a nice happy medium here. I don't want to wash it out too much like that. I mean, the sky is part of the scene. It's important to include it. So I think somewhere in there. I tend to get a little more aggressive in the hue, saturation, luminance panel than I get up in the basic panel with my saturation when I'm specifically targeting certain colors down here. I tend to run into fewer problems being aggressive, but you always want to watch out All right, let's move on to the purples. You can see here our whole side of the building is basically turned purple. So we get some of that purple color out by desaturating it. But again, I want the color there. So I think I'm going to address that problem a little bit in a few minutes when we change the hue. I don't really like magentas in my pictures so much. It's kind of a made-up color a little bit. But you can see we're picking up some magenta hues over in here. It's getting a little blotchy. It looks terrible. Oh my gosh. But I'm going to just take the magenta out. I don't like the magenta. So there we go. So we can sort of see where we started and how we bumped up mostly in the sky area there. Yeah, a little bit of orange on the right hand side too. Yeah, it's a little subtler, but that's okay. Let's go over here to the hue. And here we'll start with orange just for dramatic effect. You can see I can push it way yellow, or I can push it way to the red side. So we have a lot of control over how we fine tune our colors here. But I like the orange being orange here. I'm gonna find something that looks pretty sharp. And I just go back and forth on my sliders. So the red you can see back there on the building down here is being affected. I sort of want that to be more orange to match the existing building. Let's keep going. Move on to yellows. Here I can push the yellows away from the greens. You can see if I push the yellows in this direction, the trees really start popping green. We don't want that. I don't want to make them orange either. So we'll just do a little bit of that. Greens down here. We can not a lot of green action going on. Here we're going to start messing with the sky and some of the colors on the building. So we want to be careful in here. The blues, I can push them towards aqua, and that looks obviously amazing. Not. And I don't want to push them way over to the magenta side either. So, you know, you want to be careful with the blues. I think right. I'm going to leave them right at 0. The purples, I said before, I don't want those to be pink. We're going to push those over to the blues. I think that's going to look a lot sharper. And that's going to be the big difference that we get out of this particular editing sequence. And the magentas, same type of thing. So before edits, after edits. Now we can go over here to the luminance set of sliders. We're just going to do the same thing. We're going to adjust the brightness value of all these things. So here's where I can kind of play around with if I increase the luminance a little bit in the reds. Check it out and see what's happening. It looks okay. You know, I can make it look terrible. Some of that is just artifacting from the GPU. All right, you make the orange like really bright. Again, you want to watch your histogram. Make sure that when you're doing this, you're not blowing out any of those color channels. So we can make it really bright. We can make it dark, and that looks terrible, obviously. So I can add a touch of light there. Yellows. If you want to make that dark, then those trees become really distracting down there. We're going to keep that on a little bit of brighter side. Greens remain hidden. And the aquas. Not too much in that area. Blue, so you can wash out the sky here. You can make it really dark and dramatic here. And what's nice is that if we make it dark like that, we can go back to the saturation slider and minimize the saturation. I'm going to leave a little bit on the darker side. Add a little contrast in these clouds up here is nice. Wish we had a little bit more over here. We might end up replacing that later on. But how much you can see what Lightroom considers purple, all those clouds. So we still have some purple in the side of the building over here as well. So as we darken that, the sky gets darker. You know, like I said before, I don't want to split too often. So we can take it kind of in the same direction. See how that works out. But here's what you can see happening. look in the clouds here, you get this nasty kind of like line in here where, I don't know, Photoshop or Lightroom thinks that some part of this is magenta. What happens if we go over here? Magenta's already desaturated. Hoping that would fix things. So you just want to, stay close. Make sure that that line doesn't become an issue. So we'll just leave it like that. You can see the dramatic difference. Here's where we started. Some color tweaks, that's where we ended up. So the sky's more dramatic. I think the color rendition on the shadow side of the building is better. It just looks sharper. It's more contrasty. I'm liking where we're going here. This is also where, if you wanted to, you could make it black and white. You can start that in the basic panel. Click on black and white here. One nice thing is when you're in this panel over here, you can adjust all these color tones individually. So I can make the orange areas brighter or darker. We're not going to do that right now, but this is where you can really fine-tune your black and white sequencing. I am going to go back to the basic panel here for a second and revisit vibrance and saturation just to make sure I'm not over cooking this thing. So I'm going to back off a little bit on the saturation and maybe a little bit on the vibrance. You can see where we are there. Just a little tweak. That's the nice thing about Lightroom. We can do that as much as we want. It doesn't hurt anything. Then we move down here, split toning. Split toning gives us the opportunity to add a certain color to the highlights and then a different color to the shadow areas. Again, it helps with the overall color toning. So I might decide that there's not enough orange in the highlight areas, and I can add that just by dialing in a bit of orange color. You can see the effect of it. So I can add a little color to the clouds, maybe like make it feel more like a sunset, and I can tweak this. I don't, I could go icy cold blue. I'm not really interested in that look. We could, maybe something right in there. We could go crazy with it, make it look like something out of Mad Max or something like that, or we can just back it off, just warm it up and back it off. Maybe something like that. And then on the shadow side, this is a really common color combination. We add blue to the shadows, you add orange to the highlights. We're going to crank up the shadows here, the saturation in the shadows for a moment, just so we can see where we're adding them, and we can just kind of scroll through here. I want a little bit deeper, darker blue. So now we're getting into the magentas again. And you can see how the shadows, the blue shadows, kind of neutralize that orange color there. We'll take care of that. We're just doing this for to see the limits of the effect. I'm going to back off here. Some color about that. We can back off the saturation and find the right balance. You can see it enhances this blue over here and orange here. Turn it off, turn it on. See, I think it's kind of dulling it out. We could play around with the balance to see how much, we can shift all the shadow side, so more shadows, more tones are considered shadow and get the blue tint, or we can shift it over so that more pixels pick up the orange. If I had to use it, I'd go somewhere about there. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't like it. We're going to leave it off this time. I don't use it a ton. A lot of times if I want to add color toning in the shadows or the highlights or the midtones even, I'll do that in the tone curves and those individual color channels. Moving on, we move over here to the detail. And this is where we deal with sharpening and noise reduction. Now, noise reduction picks up all that random noise that's generated by higher ISOs. Every camera generates noise. If you're shooting in RAW, your images will almost certainly have noise. If you shoot in JPEG, your camera is probably already performing this step, so you don't want to necessarily do it twice because you can go too far with it. This is one area where I do reverse the order that Lightroom presents things, and I usually do the noise reduction first. And these are two edits that you're almost certainly going to want to do at full strength. If not, zooming in a little bit more. We'll actually zoom in a little bit more here for us. All right. You can see there's little speckles here That's not how the building looks. That's just random electrons bouncing around our sensor, causing variation in brightness value. If we dial the noise reduction all the way up to 100%, get rid of all the noise, you can see it smooths it out way too much. It looks almost plasticky. We can kind of check around other spots here. That looks a little blotchy. I don't like how that looks at all. So we're going to back that off again. You can see we get a little bit more noise here. You know, you don't have to go crazy with the noise reduction at this stage of the game. Just enough to get some of those major speckles out of things and out of the sky, really. I don't normally touch the color slider, the detail. You know, if it was a landscape shot, I might tweak the details and the contrast sliders. Again, there's no magic number here that's going to work for every image or a camera, so you just eyeball it. I think 23 is actually probably a little too high for me. I'm going to back it off a little bit, and we're going to move on to sharpening. Now, sharpening just adds contrast around every edge in your picture. So if we convert this to black and white, I did that by holding down the Alt button. If we do that, you can kind of see all the edges, all the areas of contrast. An edge always has a bright side and a dark side, and all the sharpening does is make the dark side a little bit darker and the bright side a little bit brighter. So let's zoom in here again and check out our sharpening at 100%. Now, you don't want to go too far with this. You can see if I dial this all the way up, we start sharpening the noise, we start over sharpening everything, the whole image starts looking crunchy. So I'm kind of conservative with it. I stick to something with 50s and 60s. I sometimes will adjust the radius a little bit. I'll turn this masking on. Again, hold down the Alt button, you drag this over, and what this does is it stops sharpening from happening in these areas that are supposed to be smooth, because the only thing it would sharpen in those areas is noise and make the noise worse. So we don't want that. So I usually dial that masking up until I see these large areas turn black, and where you see black, it means there's no sharpening being applied. Where you see the white, that's what the sharpening is being applied. So you can see all the edges on the building, the trees, the grass even. That's all good. In the sky, we don't need any sharpening up there. So that's turning out all right. So we see before and after on this. You can't see it at this resolution. We can zoom in here. Before and after, looking good. Moving on. We have lens corrections. Now again, this is something I think Lightroom really should move up to the basic panel, way up top, because every lens needs this. Now I just click these two things and I let it go. What it does is it tries to look up in a database how much your lens distorts the scene. Lenses can add a pincushion distortion, or can add a barrel distortion, where it warps the image out of where straight lines don't appear straight anymore. And all Lightroom's trying to do is straighten things out. Now, the lens I used on this is kind of a specialty lens. The very sharp, very straight lines. I don't have a lot of distortion in it. The other thing it tries to do, though, is fix the chromatic aberration. And what happens with chromatic aberration is the red colors and the blue colors don't quite focus at the same point, so you can get some weird fringing, especially in the corners of your pictures. You'll see this a lot on wide-angle lenses, where the light has to bend at extreme angles to get back into your camera. A one-click fix. It's pretty simple. I click, and I don't even really think about it anymore. Some lenses are really particularly nasty. We can go look in the corners here. I don't see any chromatic aberration happening, so I'm happy. But on some lenses, you may have to go in here and manually tweak it. Now, the transform panel has recently undergone an update, and a welcome one at that. There are these auto transforms and level and vertical and full, where you click these buttons and Lightroom supposedly straightens your image out. Let me tell you something. They don't quite work the way they're advertised, and I almost never use them. Now, again, we talked about it before that in this particular image, there's not a lot of vertical lines that need to appear vertical. This is a weird-looking building. We got rid of the light pole on the left-hand side when we cropped, and we got rid of the light pole on the right-hand side when we cropped. And so honestly, there's not a lot we could do, but I still want to show you this guided perspective. This is what I'm really happy with. And you see, I hit the guided button here, and what it allows me to do is draw right on the image which lines are supposed to be vertical. So I can go find this building edge back here. I know this corner is supposed to be vertical. So I click on my first point and I just drag. And you can see in the sort of a magnified view, I just line it up and I click on there. Boom. I've established one vertical line. Now I can look over here. I can see this pole. I'm going to assume that pole happens to be vertical. Let's zoom in here so we can get a closer look. And I don't see any other good buildings. But, you know, you're looking for buildings. You're looking for doors and windows are almost always perfectly vertical. You can use those as guidelines too. So I just line it up carefully. And you can see what happens. It straightens the image up a little bit. I can turn this off and on. So it's not a radical difference. In this case, I was pretty good with my initial setup. But what's nice is you can also draw horizontal lines. Now I'll pick a couple random horizontal lines. I'm going to make it up, and Lightroom might actually freak at this, but we can see, you know, let's say these two lines were both supposed to be horizontal. They're obviously not. They're not parallel, but Lightroom will make them parallel. Well, obviously that's not exactly what we want for this particular image. So we're not going to worry about those lines on this building. But if I was doing a traditional building where things were squared up and we wanted horizontal lines, you just draw two vertical lines, two horizontal lines, and Lightroom does all the math for us. It is great. This is a fantastic addition to Lightroom. Moving on. Go down here to Effects. Now we can add a little bit of a vignette if we want around the corners and draw attention to the middle. I mean, some people go really heavy-handed with this sort of thing. I almost never use it at all. If I do, you want it to be pretty subtle, and I might even feather it more. So you can see, that's the wrong direction. Feather it more, something like that. Just something subtle. And that's it. Some people like to add a little bit of grain in their photos. I'm not going to do that on this shot. Dehaze is an interesting little feature that they added recently as well. It's handy for landscape photos where distant subjects get a little hazy due to atmosphere or weather, and basically it sort of adds a little contrast in. And you can see what it's doing here. Sort of averages the whole scene, figures out the color, and sort of like an average contrast level, and sort of tries to subtract that out. It can be handy to reduce the overall contrast in an image, and it can be useful to add a little bit of contrast if it's needed as well. As you can see what's happening up in the clouds. The clouds almost appear to like change shape a little bit as it's adding blue and adding contrast. I mean, it's kind of a freaky effect. But in this image, I don't use it on every image. Sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think I might just back off just a touch, just like that. You can, again, we'll check before and after. And I like what it's doing in here. It's just bringing out a little bit more detail in the shadows there. Now, camera calibration, I think we touched on earlier. I changed my profile here just to make sure my colors were accurate. And there we go. That's our basic run through on our global edits. Anyway, we can always come back up here and tweak things. We can always check out the histogram here, make sure we're not blowing anything out, and our indicator lights are off, which is a good sign. We might just lower the exposure, see what that does, or maybe you want it brighter. You can just tweak it. Sometimes you adjust things and you decide you want something different. Now, those are the global edits. I like to do my global edits first, and then I return and do my local edits. And all the local edits can be done up here, and it's pretty handy. We have this adjustment brush, a radial filter, which is, I guess, a couple generations old now. We have a gradient filter, We have spot removal, which is a little bit clunkier than cloning is in Photoshop. The cloning kind of edits, I usually go and do that all in Photoshop. It just works better. But you have to decide, like, what does this picture need? I think we still could do something with this sky. And so it's a pretty broad area. I might try to bring in a little bit of I might lower the exposure down a little bit, maybe add a little bit of color. So what I'm going to use for this is the gradient filter. So I just click on that. Now what's nice about the gradient filter is it gives us control of all of these settings. You know, exposure, highlight, and color. And we can limit it to a certain area of the picture. And that's what I mean by a local edit. Global edits change the overall image, and local edits are restricted to very specific regions. Let me show you what we mean here. So I have a lot of presets kind of built in down here. They don't come standard with Lightroom, but this top bench does. So let's go to exposure. We'll start with that, and we can change any of this stuff after the fact. And all you do is we're going to click a spot, and we're going to drag down. So you can see where it starts and sort of fades out, and we'll fade it to about there. And I'm just making sure it's kind of parallel with the building. And you're probably saying, well, John, why did we make it washed out? Why did we make it super bright? You know, that's just how it was. I'm going to go change it now, and I can dial in whatever number I really want. So I can dial in, I don't want it to start going black up here. That looks a little fake. But I can go right about there, which is about a stop underexposed. Just adds a little contrast to the scene here. And we can drag this down more and see if we like it. And I kind of do like it a little bit better all the way down here. And we can grab this here and see. Maybe we should have started maybe up there a little bit more. And we can keep tweaking what the sky's going. Add a little contrast. Do we want more highlights, or do we want to take those highlights down? I think I'm going to take them down a little bit. You see we're affecting the building a little bit, but I like it's not terrible. It's not bothering me at all, really. Like that, you know. We add a little more of that clarity. Clarity is pretty good in these cloud type areas. Now you don't want too much because you don't want that area to distract from the main building. So you might decide to soften it up a little bit. I think I'm going to soften it up too. And again, we have the power of the dehaze button, so we can really go super crazy aggressive, which is awful, or we can back off. I'm just going to leave it how it is now. You might think that the saturation is too much, so we could back off the saturation. You can go aggressive with it. I'm going to back off just a hair, I think. Right about there. I'm going to lessen the sharpness a bit. And then I'm going to come up here to the color temperature. I'm going to see if we can't warm this up a little bit. That's not looking great. And we can turn it on and off and see. I'm gonna take that color off. I don't like that. We can add color here, but I don't feel like doing that right now. So we'll just close that. That's looking all right. We can also use the adjustment brush. I'm seeing this building down here. It's looking kind of hot. It's looking a little hot for me, meaning too bright. We're going to lower the exposure down on that. I'll just dial in a -1 exposure there. Now I can choose auto mask, which says to Lightroom, I don't want this brush bleeding out into other unsimilar things. I'll zoom in to help me keep it contained a little bit. But let's see what happens if I start painting on here. You can see what's going on there. I'm just darkening that bright orange spot, and it looks oversaturated and it looks really orange right now. But we can go and tweak all this other stuff, right? We'll take that saturation way down there. We'll lessen the clarity on that. Lower the highlights down a little bit. Lower the contrast. You know, again, you can turn this on and off. So that's before, that's after. Another nice thing about the brush is that once you kind of know the direction you want to go, you can hold down the Alt button and you can kind of scale this up and down. So you can watch, I can increase the effect. That's obviously not what I want to do. I want to kind of cut it in half and see where we are. I don't want to go too far with it. Maybe something like that. So you can see these values over here all changed a little bit. And now it's still bright, still looks natural, but it's not over the top. We can add another brush if we want, just by hitting New. Let's see. Maybe I just want to darken this area up down here a little bit. I think on this one I'm going to turn the auto mask off, and we'll just see what happens. Paint that in, paint down here. Paint over here. Right there. All right, now we can go in here and fine tune this. So you can see you can make it real bright. Just want to de-emphasize it a little bit. De-emphasize things by taking contrast out. I can take the contrast out by raising the shadows. Don't want that. Maybe like that. Bring the whites down. Lower the clarity, lowers the contrast too. And lowering so I can bump up the saturation. That will bring attention to that part of the scene. You just lower the saturation a little bit. So not a huge shift. Not a huge shift, but you know, a little bit subtle. Maybe I want to bring some more color in up here. So we're going to hit New, and this time we're going to come over here to saturation. You can see our saturation goes up to 25 here. And I'm just going to paint over this whole area here. And let's just go down here too, in the orange areas. Now let's dial it way up, and you can see what we're impacting here. And I just want to pop more color. Yeah. Add a little, I don't want more clarity. Sometimes you have an idea and you try it and it doesn't work. That's okay. I don't mind that. Just playing around with a couple different ideas. All right, something like that. All right, then hit close. And we're pretty much where we want to be. You know, from here, I might take it into Photoshop. Again, I might try to look for a sky or something that I can replace in here, because this big blotch of white isn't really doing it for me. But I like where the building itself is. As you can see, Lightroom lays it out nice. You start at the top, you just sort of work your way down the menu. Now, the concepts that Lightroom uses are the same in any editing software. You're going to want to tweak your exposure, because sometimes the correct exposure, quote unquote, isn't exactly the best exposure for your scene. And you want to make your subject a little bit brighter, a little bit darker, whatever the case may be. So you want to tweak the exposure, you want to tweak the contrast, which will make the image pop a little bit more, or mute it. Again, depends on what you want. And you're going to want to tweak the colors. That starts with saturation, like how much color appears, how vivid that color appears. It can really also make, you know, certain subjects really stand out. You know, from there, sharpening, noise reduction are sort of basic parts of any workflow these days. Those are kind of the 5 big ones. Now, Lightroom breaks it down and gives you a little bit more fine tuning ability than some software packages out there do. But any software package that's worthwhile these days will have most of this stuff available in it. Certainly the ones that come with your camera have all this stuff built in. Adobe does, and there's other software packages out there too. So before we go, I just wanted to show you how far we came. This is more or less our finished product, and I might bring this into Photoshop and tweak some things and burn and dodge some edges in here just to refine it a little bit. But we're pretty much where we want to be, and this is where we started. I was pretty excited when I saw this image, but now I look at it, I'm like, oh, it looks dark, it looks flat, like there's a huge black hole here, and it looks gray and muddy. But there is color in this scene that we can use, and we did to enhance it and end up with something more along these lines. So, hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions at all on how to use any of these features in Lightroom, give me a shout out, email, see me in class, whatever the case may be. And until next time, have a good day. Bye.